Awesome. So Lisa Wang, welcome to the Career Online Show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. I'm really stoked to hang out with you today. You have a very cool background that you started as a gymnast, which I find very cool. So how did you kind of start in that whole world? Because I just find athletes just think differently. I just find that there's a different, inside push. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I had an interesting story about how I got into gymnastics in the first place. So I was actually 9 years old, and our third grade, we had something called Fine Arts Day.
Okay.
And in Fine Arts Day, you would take only fine arts classes, dancing, singing, different types of sports, and instead of math, science, typical courses. And there were two classes I was hell-bent on getting. One of them was the Beanie Baby making class. I was an avid Beanie Baby collector.
My wife has an entire attic full of Beanie Babies. She's like, I don't think they're worth anything anymore.
Yeah, unfortunately, they didn't have that long tail of success. But the other one was a gymnastics class, and I realized something even back then, which is that as my last name starts with a W and it's at the end of the alphabet, that I always chose last because the first part of the alphabet always got to choose first. And so even then, I went to the teacher and I said, it's not fair that the second half of the alphabet always has to choose after the first half. And can we change it today? So obviously this came from a selfish intention as well of I want to get my classes, otherwise I'm going to get the worst ones. And she said, okay, well, why don't you put it up for a vote? So I did, and that was, I think, my first experience community building and rallying people towards something different from the status quo. And so I ended up, getting one additional M in the alphabet, and we voted, and the second half of the alphabet won. So that meant that I got to go first. And I did eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and I ended up getting the gymnastics course. And
so is this something that you saw look cool to you, or was there some reason it looked cool to you? Or?
I think it was, I always loved to dance, I always loved to move, and I was just curious about it. Mm-hmm. And that curiosity led me to this course, and ended up I just fell in love with the apparatus and watching the girls perform, and they had a flyer for summer camp that I brought to my parents, and I said, hey, I want to take this, go to this for summer. And they had no other plans for me but to get babysat by my grandma, and they're like, sure, go do it.
We'll give grandma the summer off.
Yeah, and I did it, and I just fell in love with it. And I think really that first lesson is follow your curiosity. Mm-hmm. And follow the things that and keep going on the things that you're good at, especially if you're enjoying it. And so that's really what I did. I kind of doubled down on my strengths. I realized that I was pretty good at it, and really quickly just kind of rose in the ranks over the next few years as then I became junior national champion, got into the national team, became senior national champion, and then by the time I was in high school, I was traveling to dozens of countries to compete in Grand Prix and World Cup competitions. Wow. And so really my entire childhood was dedicated to that focus of succeeding in athletics, but simultaneously, especially given my parents' immigrant background, I think there was a big emphasis on doing well in school. Mm-hmm. And I was still in a Chicago public school. We had 1,111 students in my graduating class. So really big school. And, I would miss weeks on end of school, and somehow I'd get all my homework before. I'd do it even when I was training in Russia or Uzbekistan or wherever. And I would come back and I'd have all of my homework done. And there were people who had been in school the entire time, and they were behind. And I was like, I don't understand, how this is possible. And I guess that just speaks to something that I developed, whether that's as an individual or as an athlete, which is that this intense degree of focus on your dream makes it much easier to say no to things that are misaligned with that vision that you have for yourself.
That's interesting, because I think so many people get pulled into that. They run for the next shiny object, but when you got a big goal like that, you really just stay with it.
Yeah. And so that made it so that really in my life, up to the age of 19, I only had two focuses. I had gymnastics and succeed in that, in school, succeed in that. So it did mean that I missed out on social life, parties. I didn't go to prom or any of those things.
Do you find that you missed, some of that not being a kid, or do you feel like it was, I guess, better the way it was?
Well, now looking back, and even then, I was like, it's okay, because I've heard about this thing called college and how it's the best 4 years of your life. The movies say it's like awesome.
I commuted, so I don't know. I didn't have that experience.
And I had this belief that when I got to college, I would get everything that I missed in terms of social life. I would get that times 10. And so I think of it as, I'm really proud that I stuck to that goal that I had, and that pursuit of excellence in a particular field, so that by the time I was able to go to college, I could have that freedom to really explore all these various parts of myself that, and I didn't feel that pressure of needing to find my thing because I hadn't yet found it.
Sure. And were you still competing, in gymnastics in this time in college, or had you decided to move on from that at that point? And if so, what was that decision like?
So I took a gap year before college to finish my gymnastics career, and the toughest part actually about my entire athletic career was that my vision and my dream was to get to the 2008 Olympic Games. Mm-hmm. And for a number of reasons, I ended up at the key qualifying competition missing it by 0.25 tenths of a point.
Wow.
And it's very hard to articulate how difficult that can be mm-hmm. for someone who has dreamed about that for over a decade, to miss it by a hair. And when that happened, my entire life and just perception of self mm-hmm. just completely crumbled, and I was like, well, what do I live for now? And
well, and at that level though too, like that small of a minute detail, like that's the difference between the person that's winning the whole thing and the person that doesn't make it. So like it's interesting because when you put it in perspective, most regular people aren't getting anywhere close to that. You're at the top level, and you barely missed.
Yeah, and that's what made it hurt even more, right? You're like, that's one toe made the difference. Right. And so then you run through all these scenarios of if only, why didn't I work hard enough? Maybe I wasn't prepared enough, like I'm not good enough. And that is this underlying feeling of not enoughness has permeated my life for quite some time, and it's actually why I have a podcast called Enoughness, to actually explore that. But back to that particular point in time, I think that was a key decision moment for me, which was that should I just quit now, which was very, very tempting. You're kind of in your lowest lows, and you're like, I have nothing else to aim for because I've done everything else, and I'm not going to wait another 4 years to do this gamble, and or do I continue and basically try and end on a high note?
Sure.
And it was really tough, but ultimately I decided, I pushed college a year back. I had gotten accepted early, and I said, I'm not coming. And I made a decision at that moment that I was going to be the best gymnast I could ever be. And for the first time, I was doing it for myself and not for, other people or this, big goal that I had years and years from now. I just wanted to, in some ways, almost prove that I could motivate myself for the internal and not for the external checkbox that I'd been doing.
So cool, because I feel like so many people, they're not doing it for themselves. Like I even look at my own education. Like I did it for my parents early on. It wasn't for me. So I think to look at that internal motivation, like that's a huge deal. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why you've been so successful in business, is you have this internal motivation.
Yeah, and it is a natural drive, and I think it's the first time you're able to do it when, in many ways now, now that I've gotten over that, the emotional pain and shame and everything that I experienced then, I look at it as a blessing, right? Mm-hmm. To be able to fail so publicly at such a young age, and learn how to recover from that. Sure. I think that's really the mark of a successful entrepreneur, or anything else that you go after if it's a big dream, because you're inevitably going to fail. And when I look back at all of those times at practice or competition, every single one of my failures were public. Mm-hmm. And so the athlete who succeeds is the one who gets over that mental and physical pain and just says, okay, I got to get up and do it again and again and again. And that just becomes part of a natural journey, versus people who've maybe never tried for fear of failing, right, and just and that fear blocks them from ever going after what they want.
So I can imagine it's easier to do a cold call. It's easier to send that right email or approach that right person, because when you failed publicly, you're a lot tougher than the average person.
Yeah, I mean, it's still hard for me.
Sure.
And because it's also a different arena of rejection. Than there's business rejection,
Sure.
There's personal rejection, there's like all this other stuff weaved in. But I think that one of the things that I learned was like, how do you step outside of yourself? Mm-hmm. It's almost the metacognition of watching yourself do it and thinking through what are the worst case scenarios. And at the end of the day, sending this email or doing a cold call, the worst thing they can do is ignore you or say no.
Right, 100%. So in this gap year, then, like, how did your career end off? Because you did make the Hall of Fame, which is extremely impressive.
Yeah.
So how did that kind of end off there?
Well, I ended my career as at the U.S. National Championships in 2008, and ended up winning all-around champion, every single gold medal, kind of swept it.
Wow,
and then
awesome.
Yeah, so that was like, all right, peace. Now I'm out. And
going out on top.
Exactly. And I love finishing on top like that, because I think it shows the internal strength that
mm-hmm.
someone can have even after.
Yeah, it's like the the baseball player, the football player that didn't retire because they got too old. They got retired because they had nothing left to win.
Yeah. So the Hall of Fame thing didn't come until I had graduated college, actually.
Got it.
So I had gotten an email. I was like, hey, congratulations, like, you've been nominated and you've been accepted, and here's this award ceremony that's going to happen. And I think it was at that point it'd been so many years, and to be honest, it was still very painful until about a year and a half ago, that I was able to truly get over this feeling of never being good enough, that stemmed from that even 2016 I couldn't watch the Olympics.
Wow.
Like, it was still that I would make excuses, deflect it, and it's one of those things that if you're self-reflective enough, you notice the things that you avoid are probably the things that you most need to face. And
my friend John, I think it was the 2012 Olympics, he won a silver medal for the rings, and he didn't even make the team the next year. So he's like, it's so hard to take a look at that when you're like, I could be at that level, but it just didn't happen.
Yeah. So I remember I was working in finance at the time, and I got the email, and it just felt like, honestly, it kind of felt like redemption. And just that even though I didn't make it to the Olympics, and everyone was like, she's going to go, you're going to go. I'm like, I'm going to go. And that at the end of the day, I was still Olympic level, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm still very much an Olympian and at the same world stage. And for the Hall of Fame, the USA Gymnastics Committee to recognize that I did have a significant impact on shaping the sport meant a lot to me.
That's awesome. So then how did you move into business from here? Because I feel like we've really got the mindset you have here. Like, you're going to push it through, you're going to win. But how did you move into being an entrepreneur then?
So I think that there's predefined notions of success in society, and for the longest time it's been, go to an Ivy League school, get into a top 3 consulting firm or investment bank.
Sure. And
from there you launch a career, or maybe you just move up to SVP, what have you. And when I was working in finance, probably immediately I knew it was wrong for me. I actually was a literature major, so it was like kind of a spoof that, but I guess that's what happens, like at like Ivies, they bring smart people and then they say we can train them into.
Sure. You went to an Ivy, so you're good.
Yeah. And so I got into finance. I followed the predefined notions of what it meant to have a successful job, and I just, to be quite honest, I felt unhappy. And I think it's a sort of unhappiness a lot of people feel.
Sure. And
the only difference was that I did something about it. And I did something about it very quickly, instead of letting like 10, 20 years pass before I realized that it's just, I can't handle it anymore. One of the things that I really wanted was, impact and creative ownership. And when I would go to meetings and I'd hear how the firm was up, 0.001%, I was like, well, that means I had an impact of 0.0000 something percent. And that just feels like, in many ways, a waste of my potential.
Sure.
And I was reading TechCrunch articles and just all this. This is like when all these startups were just randomly getting funded. The app Yo got funded, and I was just so angry that such a dumb thing was getting funded. And I was like, imagine what I could do with $1 million.
That didn't need to be made.
Yeah. And I just thought, like, imagine what I could do if I leveraged my skills and my desire to create impact. And I probably wouldn't recommend what I did to a lot of people, which is that actually, this part I would. I started following my curiosity. I'm like, well, what do I like to do in general?
That's how I got through college, but I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah.
I got to my senior year, and they're like, you can double major, take one class. I'm like, really? Interesting.
Yeah. So, what I realized I liked, I was like, well, I made a list. I was like, well, I like drinking wine. I like eating out. I like hanging out with my friends. And so for a period, I thought I was going to work in the wine industry.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's a good industry to be in.
Yeah, so I had this vision of Lisa the sommelier, who's like, pouring wine and like going to vineyards. And so I actually, at that point, I started cold emailing a bunch of top sommeliers in New York. And it was quite simply an email that said, hey, Lisa, random girl in finance who just like really likes wine and is interested in your career. And, again, it was just kind of just because I didn't know what else to do. And I was like, well, let me ask the people who've done it. And a couple of them responded, and I ended up talking to one of them before dinner service at his restaurant. And he was like, well, there's two ways you get started. Either you start as like a bar back or you work at a wine store. So he's like, it just so happens I know this wine store on the Lower East Side that has a part-time salesperson open. So I interviewed there, and I ended up getting a part-time cashier job at a wine store. So I was...
It's not what I would expect the first stare this to be.
I was hedge fund by day, fancy hedge fund, and wine store cashier on the Lower East Side by night.
Nice.
And that really helped... it was interesting. I think one of the things I first noticed was how differently I was treated. When you're in a different role and they don't know my background, I'm just like the girl behind the cashier, lifting boxes and like pointing out wine for you. And one of the things I realized, like, you can't have ego in anything that you do, no matter what you've achieved, because at the end of the day, you're still interacting with humans who are looking for value and service from products and companies if you're serving them. So I think I gained empathy for service workers at that point, and I had a brief stint in potentially starting a wine in a can business, which if I had started back then, look at where it is now, right? And then I ended up enrolling in a startup boot camp called Startup Institute, but so during that time, I actually maintained my job on Wall Street and was working like ridiculous hours.
So you just like weren't sleeping at this point.
Yeah, and
can we like turn off New York City? New York City's been a pain.
let me get my water.
No fire trucks this time, so that's good. So that window really doesn't close, or it just comes right through the window?
Actually, I closed it.
So it just comes right through the window.
Yeah, it does. I mean, these aren't thick.
We need padding, man.
Yeah.
I have padding in my studio.
Alright,
Are we good?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So you were talking about, not really sleeping.
Yeah, and I, finally had the nerve to tell my parents that I was no longer going to be working at this firm, because basically the moment...
So did they know you were working at the wine store too, or...?
I can't remember if they knew or not. I feel like they did and did not approve. But the conversation that I actually had to take the leap with my boss was, one day he called me into his office and he said, hey, Lisa, on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy are you? And I was like, what? Like, I thought I came in here to talk about our projects. And I ended up thinking, okay, default answer 7. Can't be a 7 because, like, I'm just definitely not a 7, but, like, can't say 5, too neutral. So I blurted out 6. And when I did that, he just stayed silent. And I was like, well, sometimes I'm a 7. And he was like, well, do you understand this is a golden opportunity for so many people to work at this fund? And that was the moment when I said, yes, I understand that, but it's not my golden opportunity. And from that conversation is when he said, go figure out what it is that you want to do. And that's when I started emailing all these wine people. And, but at that point, we had already started like a plan of, okay, when are you going to exit?
Got it. So your boss was actually like trying to be cool about it.
He was pretty cool about
That's awesome.
it. And so probably I stayed for another 3 months. I trained the summer interns, and then I was like, okay, now I got to tell my parents. And I think at first definitely they just did not understand, because they're like, what's your plan? I was like, I don't actually have a plan. I'm going to this boot camp to learn like what startups are, pretty much. And it's going to be this boot camp of other people who are changing careers and don't know what they're doing, and we're just going to learn skills that I think could be applicable to the tech world.
Sorry, it's getting too loud.
Oh, bummer. At least there's no yelling at homeless people. That's good.
Yeah.
So you're talking about camp to build skills.
Yeah. And so when I did end up telling them, it was my mom showed up at my apartment. My dad was on the phone yelling, crying, all this is like big mess. And the only thing I could say was, but I'm not happy.
Did they care about that or at the time?
I'm sure like my parents always have wanted what's best for me.
Sure.
But I think from a responsible parent perspective, it's like, look at this job where you're getting paid well. There's a clear trajectory. You don't even know what you're doing. Like it's, it makes sense from their perspective, especially because they came from an immigrant background and came from nothing. So to kind of watch their daughter, who's like gone to this great school, achieved all these things, like just give it up. I think they were just really scared, probably. But I think I've proved time and time again that if I go for something and I'm all in, I make it work.
Totally. So how did you, I guess, make that pivot from there then?
So I did end up going to Startup Institute, did that for a couple months. My first job out of it was as a right hand to a CEO at a web and app development agency. So even back then, I had this like notion inside of me that I was going to be a CEO, that I was going to be a founder. And not everyone who graduates Startup Institute thinks like that. A lot of them are like, let's work at a startup.
Sure.
And I don't know, I guess it's just I knew that I had a leadership instinct inside of me, and so I thought, what better than to sit right next to the CEO, see how he emails, what events he goes to. So I did that for about 8 months before getting the itch to finally start my own thing. And from there, I launched a late night munchies delivery app. I heard that there was this thing called accelerators. So I Googled and I found this food tech accelerator, and I applied. And, it was really just I think I'm a master Googler, which is really how I find out a lot of things. And because what is the art of Googling? The art of Googling is the ability to ask good questions.
Yep.
To know what to type in. And
I feel like I'm trying to explain to all my friends like how to use Google. My parents are still like typing in 2 words. I like want this. It's like, no, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
Like, if you want to look for your name, you need your name in quotation marks, so you get just those results.
Yeah. But yeah, no, it's like, for me, it was like funding sources. I need money. Where do I find money? Well, let's figure out what kind of resources there are for new founders.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
Do we get like extra time because we started late, or?
I didn't get an update, so
Okay,
so
but
I didn't know that it was coming up. So.
I'm gonna act like we do, so we'll see how
Okay.
it goes.
Yeah.
Keep going.
So yeah, what happened? Oh, so yeah, I applied to an accelerator. I got in, got some money, and then basically launched it. And at that point, built up a bike fleet for my late night munchies delivery company, and realized at a certain point that the problem I was trying to solve, which was, helping people late at night, whatever they were doing late at night, get food quickly, that I was now up till 4 or 5 a.m. managing the operations. And I was like, I do not want to, now I'm living the nightmare. And
Sorry.
and I don't want to run an operational business.
Sure.
So from there, basically, if I fast forward to the reason She Works was launched was because of the experience I had fundraising for that company and realizing going through my own challenges of the biases and the sexism that happen in Silicon Valley, and wanting to create a space with other female entrepreneurs who could empathize with the journey and who were seeking solutions to the funding challenges.
Got it. So, would you be willing to set up another time over Skype to just finish this? Because I just don't feel
Sure.
like, because we have the audio problems, it would be.
Yeah.
This isn't like a full interview.
Yeah.
This is a really good story, so I want to make
Yeah.
sure we finish it in the right way.
Yeah.
Is that cool?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So we're just gonna end it here.
Okay.
I'm gonna get your card or something so we
Okay.
can set up a time. So
Yeah.
we need like another 15, 20 minutes,
Cool.
and I want to wrap it up.
Okay. Do you want to just do the email? Or
Yeah. Let me take your email.
Okay.
Oh, my wife's at the beach. She just sent me my daughter. She's sleeping.
So cute.
All right. What's your email?
Lisa, Lisa, at sheworks, SHEWORX.com.
Okay. Cool. All right. So I will shoot you an email. My data's not on. I'll shoot you an email because I want to wrap this up the right way.
Cool.
This is a very good story, so I want to make sure you get it. So I just shot you an email. We'll figure it out.
Are these slots like 40 minutes?
They're supposed to be 40 minutes, but we've been having trouble with microphone wires or something, and we don't know all day.
Yeah.
So we were trying to figure it out for the first.
But we've been trying.
Yeah. So we spent like the first 10, 15 minutes trying to figure it out. So
And also,
we'll set up another time. Just want to wrap it the right way.
because of
Food,
the
too.
podcast downstairs.
I see. Got it. So how long have you been working on your podcast?
Beginning of 2015.
Do you focus on it full time or do you?
So I have a media company that we do like PR around podcast bookings. So like my wife's my business partner. She's been in PR for like 10 years, and I've had the show for 5. So we have a cool team that works with like booking, all that kind of stuff. So that's my full time. I just kind of use the podcast to get attention and standing in the space, so it's easier to book shows and stuff.
When you say booking, you help.
Yeah, so like somebody will come to me and they're like, hey, I'm launching a book, or I'm trying to get more awareness for my brand or whatever, so we'll, find the right audience, get them booked in the right shows, and kind of just run the whole program for them.
Got it.
So I have a couple of publicists that work for me and stuff.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, my next saves, I'm going to write a book around enoughness.
Oh, that's
my
awesome.
kind
I
of
gotta check out your podcast too. I haven't heard of that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I took a
It's
hiatus.
a great topic because so many people struggle with it.
Yeah. And it's, I took a hiatus from it for like 8 months or something because of actually running She Works and then
Sure.
the exposition. And now that I have more time, I'm going to like get back into the consistency of it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you being willing to set
Yeah.
up another time
Cool.
to wrap it up. Thank you so much
Nice
for
to
your time
meet you.
today.